think we are live. And there's usually a delay of like 15 seconds or so.
Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our broadcast of the World Chess Championship 2018, starring the one and only Magnus Carlsen, current world champion, who will attempt to defend his title against American Fabiano Caruana. We were just saying before we got live that this is a rare occasion when both players are below the age of 30. Both players are extremely close in rating. There's only 3 points separating them in rating right now. Now, let's do some basic introductions. My name is Joseph Levin. With me is the illustrious Grandmaster Tal Baron, currently rated 2532. I, on the other hand, am relatively new to the world of competitive chess, and Tal has been helping me with guidance and advice along the way, and we thought it would be a lot of fun to have a broadcast in which basically we're going to have a chess lesson, we're going to enjoy the game, Tal's going to be the teacher, I'm going to be the student, I'm going to try to ask the sorts of questions that I think any student between 1400 and 1800 would ask, and Tal is going to provide us with those kinds of answers. We encourage you to join in the chat if you've got questions. By all means, we'll try to keep up with them, and we'll try to provide a simultaneous commentary and lesson format throughout the World Championships. Maybe we start with a little bit of background about the players.
Sure.
So, obviously, one of the things that's well known about Magnus Carlsen is that he was, or has been, the strongest rated player in the world for quite some time now, although his rating seems to have corrected a little bit, and Fabiano, in the meanwhile, has seemed to have caught up with him a little bit. So there's only, like we said, 3 points between them. But maybe you, as a Grandmaster, can explain to those of us who are not true experts in the game, what typifies Magnus Carlsen's style? What makes Magnus Carlsen who he is, rather than, I don't know, some other Grandmaster?
Well, there are various ways to answer this question, and not even Magnus himself knows how to answer it. From my perspective, and from what I've seen in articles in the past, is basically the amount of mistakes that he makes. He's very precise, and the source of his accuracy is probably somewhere in the balance between his intuition and his ability to diagnose and remember different patterns that he saw from the past, especially when it comes to tactics. He very rarely misses any tactics, and
so we can categorize Magnus Carlsen as a highly precise positional player, and then Caruana, on the other hand, what? We wouldn't say he's imprecise. I mean, he's certainly...
Well, there are two different types of chess players generally when you look at a professional level, and some people are leaning towards more intuitive-based style.
Mm-hmm.
One famous example is Mikhail Tal, the world champion, who's notorious for his attacking skills, and many people don't know that he probably didn't calculate most of the variations. He just felt the potential for the attack and for the initiative, and that's probably roughly half of the players.
Okay.
And then there are those which are maybe even a little bit less than half, are the more precise calculating players who have a scientific approach to the game. So they might have a good intuition, but their strong suit is their ability to calculate and see variations in their mind in a conscious fashion.
So you're saying that in the case of Caruana, this is a player who is more of a workhorse over the board. And is that the idea?
Outside.
He's actually sitting and thinking more in the form of the brute force form that we would associate with computers.
Yes.
Or and sort of that thinking process step by step, as opposed to someone like Carlsen, who you say it seems to come naturally, just seems to kind of pop up.
Yeah.
And the idea behind it is that, at least something that we discussed a long time ago. We discussed Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, where he says that intuition is, for the most part, the result of extensive experience.
Yeah.
So you think Carlsen has just seen so many games and developed such a sense of the position that the move comes to him. And you're saying Caruana is more the sort of player where he comes to the move.
Yeah.
He arrives at the correct move.
Yeah, both obviously have huge skills in both features of the game, but Caruana is leaning more towards precision and let's call it calculation and scientific based chess. And Carlsen leans more towards the efficiency part of the game.
Interesting. Okay.
So, yeah, we have.
And with that, we have our first two moves on the board.
Yeah.
We have e4, c5.
So Caruana is white. He's played e4, which is a very interesting move to play against Carlsen, given the fact that Carlsen has employed the Berlin defense for a really long time, and that didn't succeed so much for players in the past against him when they wanted to win. And also the Marshall attack with black. But Carlsen surprised with the Sicilian. And now we're going to see an interesting fight. Knight f3 and knight followed. So the principal move here is d4, but recently bishop b5 has been much more popular. And that's actually Caruana's main line, but we cannot guess what he actually prepared for this specific game. An interesting fact to notice is that Boris Gelfand with black in the first game, I think, or one of the first games, probably the third game with black against Vichy Anand in 2012, he surprised him with the same two moves that he didn't deploy in the past, and he played the Sveshnikov. Okay, we have a small delay here. So after c5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. So the Rossolimo, Caruana's main line, he doesn't deviate from his usual stuff. g6 takes and d takes c6. Nowadays, most top players play b takes c6 because d takes c6 is considered to be very safe for white and also potentially slightly better. But we'll see what Carlsen has in stock. So d takes c6 is a very positional and slow line without too many forced variations.
So we just say right out of the gates, this is looking like the sort of game where we're going to have a long, intricate, theoretical debate between the two players? Or is it more likely that the two players are going to start to deviate into sidelines and just sort of try to find... Because isn't that what Carlsen's famous for? Is just finding a position, getting to a playable position, and then outplaying his opponent in the middle game? But this is a pretty standard line. I mean, this is a line that's been discussed and debated in theory going back quite a long time.
Yeah, it is a very theoretical line and considered to be classical. Personally, I played it growing up because Sveshnikov was my main weapon and still is one of my main openings. And a few years ago, I had enough with it because I got passive positions and I got slowly outplayed with this d takes c6 move. And let's try to provide some outline of how the game usually continues. So now I'm going to make some moves. This is not the actual game. The game is at bishop g7. So just for the sake of analysis, normally they play knight c3 or h3, either of these two moves. And the main line normally, at least the old main line back when I played it usually goes knight f6, h3 to prevent bishop g4, then knight d7, and black's idea is to go e5, knight f8, knight e6, and knight d4 before castling. And then the usual theory follows something along these lines. Queen e7 to protect c5 and prepare knight f8. And then white can choose between castling short and long. And normally speaking, black will almost always launch his knight to d4, and white will remove his knight and push f4, and then there will be a slow play where white has the better structure. And this bishop is both good and bad at the same time because of the pawn structure.
Yeah, there are no there are no pawns in the center on light squares, so technically speaking, it's a good bishop, but at the same time, it's particularly passive at the moment.
Yeah.
Now, I want to ask you just, for those beginners who have been told for the first year of their training, develop your pieces in the opening, try not to make too many moves with the same piece, and then start marshalling your towards some kind of an attack. It might seem strange to invest 5 moves to position the knight on a particular square. What's the idea behind that? When can the beginner understand now you're allowed to make 5 moves in a row with the same piece, whereas now you're just supposed to stick to the 1 move per piece and then, you know, castle, etc., etc.
Yeah. So we should know the difference between an open and a closed position, mostly in the center. In this case, we have a closed or a relatively closed center. Black has an open d file because he doesn't have a pawn on the d file. But apart from that, no pawns were exchanged, and there are not a lot of potential pawn breaks in the position in the coming moves. So after black goes e5, sooner or later d4 is not so attractive for white, and black also doesn't have any effective way to break in the center, and therefore this pawn structure here with these pawns for white and these pawns for black, which will arrive to e5, it will remain like this for a long time. And because of that, we have closed lines, so we are not in a rush to put our king into safety, and we bring our pieces to their ideal squares before doing so.
So if I understand you correctly, we've actually expanded the rule that everybody's taught as a child. The first thing you're taught is develop your pieces, castle immediately, get your king to safety, and then start to marshal your pieces towards some kind of an attack. But what you've done is expanded that rule and said, sure, all of that is certainly true and mostly applies to open positions, which is what we tend to train first when we learn opening lines as a kid, when we play a lot of e4, e5 lines, maybe in things like the Scotch where things open up very quickly in the middle. But in closed positions where not much is going to happen in the way of an attack on the king in the center, we can afford to delay castling a little bit more and even invest a few more moves with the same piece in order to organize our pieces the way we'd like them to be. That's a very useful rule to expand our general opening strategy without getting caught up in theory. Because, as you and I have spoken about many times, getting too invested in theoretical debates when you are, let's say, below 1800 can lead to a situation where you spend 80% of your time studying openings rather than things that you consider to be much more critical for beginners, like tactics, solid endgames, and the fundamentals of how to coordinate your pieces.
Yeah.
All right, we do have a few more moves on the board, so maybe we can...
Since our last discussion after bishop g7, white actually started with h3, which is more precise to prevent bishop g4 and the exchange of this relatively weak bishop in this structure. And now black played knight f6 as predicted, knight c3, knight d7. And the usual mainline here is bishop e3, followed by queen d2, and some potential for bishop h6 and trading these bishops. And then, as I mentioned, followed by either castle and probably some slight pull for white, but we will see how the players address this position.
And for those of us who are wondering, why would white choose to trade off his bishop? What's the goal behind that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Before I answer it, I just want to make sure that we don't have too many let's say too much delay with our stream, because I see some comments in the chat, and that's something I feared it might happen, so I'll try to work on that. In the meantime, we'll see some updates. Okay, so bishop e3 was actually played, and okay, we will continue the video as usual because it's recorded on top of it being streamed, and people in the future will be able to see it properly. But I'll just try to make sure that
test.
Yeah, exactly. So
all right, so while you engage in the internet speed test, I'm going to go ahead and just take a look at the board and see if we can review some of what we talked about. At this point, the position continues to be closed in the center. There's not much happening, not much that's going to happen in the center except for the moves that you predicted, like e4, which has happened now. But we wouldn't exactly call that a pawn break. He's not forcing any kind of decision to be made immediately in terms of the tension in the center between the pawns. And so we can expect queen to d2, and with that diagonal bolstered between queen and bishop, we can expect white to try to force a trade of dark squared bishops. And the question for me is, why? Why would, and more significantly also, why would black agree to it?
Okay, that's one of the questions I kept asking myself when I played it with the black pieces, and it's a really tough one to answer. Usually I can provide a very logical explanation for the exchange of pieces, but here it doesn't make the classical sense from the Russian chess school point of view, because the principle is that you want to exchange pieces if the piece is strong, but in this case the bishop is closed by its own pawn.
Right.
So normally speaking we don't want to exchange it. And if you are on the stronger side, then you want to maintain some pressure and keep pieces on the board. The only serious explanation that I can come up with, or let's say two different guesses that I have, is that let's provide a variation. Let's say queen d2, queen e7, and something like bishop h6 right now. So the two reasons for it is that black is going to castle short sooner or later.
Sure.
And if he does, then his king will be safer with the bishop versus with the bishops exchanged. That's one thing to mention. And the second thing is that black has more space. And the most famous principle in context of exchanging pieces is that if you have more space, you want to avoid exchanging pieces.
I see.
And if you have less space, you would like to exchange them. And the explanation is very simple. Imagine that you have a very small apartment. Would it be more comfortable to have one person in it or 20 people in it?
Right.
Yeah, so because you prefer to have more room for each piece, so the one who's more crowded prefers to exchange pieces. And in this case, it's probably white.
And so now we have an understanding of why white is motivated to try to force the exchange of the bishops. But black is not obligated to accept that exchange. This is perhaps one of the most notable qualities of lower level play, let's say below 1400, is that the moment there's tension between two pieces, they trade them off immediately. That's why if you ever look at a game between children, pieces come off the board instantaneously. And one of the things that you hear about, like you said, in the Russian school of chess, and that you and I have spoken about many times, is maintain the tension. Let that tension sit there and fester. You're not obligated, this is not checkers, you're not obligated to take the piece. So now that white poses this offer and says, well, here are my reasons for forcing the exchange of the bishops, black's obligation, desire, avoidance, what's his response? Why does he take it if he takes it, and why doesn't he take it if he doesn't take it?
So first of all, black doesn't have a choice. He cannot run away with the bishop to avoid the exchange in this particular position. Bishop f6 makes little sense because it prevents black from being able to castle. And it's also a waste of time.
Because the bishop is well placed on the diagonal.
Yeah, this bishop doesn't do anything on f6, and with the bishop on h6 it's quite strong. It's like a like a bone in black's throat in a way. It feels really, really annoying.
Particularly as the bishop on the other side isn't going to move anytime soon.
Yes. So the normal move here is to castle or to play f6 to protect the bishop somehow. And the main line back when I used to play it was f6, so that I can still have a room for the knight on f8, and then something like castling, knight f8, and let's say knight h2. I don't remember when exactly white is capturing, but at some point he will try to get f4 in. Actually, I don't even remember how it went. It's been a while since I played it. I have an interesting game where I lost with black to Sutovsky. Emil Sutovsky, strong GM from Israel, after which I decided I've had enough with this line.
He's a 2700 level player.
Yeah. Back then he was 2640 or 50, but he's
also for those of you who don't know, he's also the president of the ACP, the Association of Chess Professionals.
Yeah, so we have e5 on the board, and now that's what I confused. Queen d2 is not the main move. Yeah, because black probably will play something different than queen e7. I'm not sure exactly what the theory is, but white castles first. And that's the main line I remember. So now it makes sense
And
to me.
now,
Queen is now black is in time to get the knight to e6, and I'm almost sure that this is how I used to play it. But yeah.
now I'm noticing something interesting. Now, you're a grandmaster. You're a 2500 level player, which is a level many people to one day reach. And yet here you are talking about a line that you've learned and that you've played, and you're saying, you know, I don't really remember this line. I don't really recall the precise move. Not to mention that the precise theory might have changed. Move order seems to change once a week, especially in Sicilian lines.
Yes.
How does that happen? Is there a way to avoid that, or does that just prove that fixating on memorizing lines in the opening might not be the wisest way to break that 1800-2000 barrier?
Well, I think that generally speaking, I'll talk about myself first. So I have a relatively good memory, but I still forget a lot of things.
Okay.
So even to me, trying to remember and memorizing lines is very ineffective.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that for those who consider themselves to have not an above average memory when it comes to chess, they should probably stick to the understanding part of the game. So try to understand the pattern in such a way that they will find the move even if they don't remember that they've seen it before. And in this position, one of the reasons that I stopped playing it is because I realized that I don't understand the line properly, and frankly I don't know if it makes sense altogether for black. Mm-hmm. So of course I'm not saying that it's bad, but I'm just saying that it was beyond my reach to play it and feel confident in my pieces, let's say.
So if I understand you correctly, you've actually given us again another important rule to use to expand our technique. You're saying it's useful to work on opening lines that come naturally to you, or the resulting positions are such that you feel a little bit more comfortable with the intuitive approach to the position. In other words, I play this, let's say, I know the opening 6 moves deep, 7 moves deep, not very deep, by certainly not by Grandmaster standards, and it sort of comes naturally now. I get more or less where I'm supposed to put the pieces, even if I don't look at hundreds and hundreds of games in that line or memorize the entire database of lines. And if I can't find those moves naturally or get a feel for the position after a while, maybe I need to just look at a different opening. That's very different from simply saying, well, all the top players are playing the Najdorf or they're playing the Rossolimo, so here I go, I'm going to play the Rossolimo too. You're saying don't force yourself into an opening system that's popular just because people are playing it if it doesn't come naturally to you or if it doesn't feel right to you as a player.
Feel, that's the word. You need to be able to feel, or like I heard people say about Carlsen and other top players, you need to have a good grasp of the position.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of similar to a language in a way.
Okay.
So if you were to pick a language to learn, you won't just pick the most, let's say, spoken language in the world, which is probably Chinese.
Chinese, I think
yeah?
so.
And I mean, we would try to choose a language that makes some sense to us, that provides us with some reward, and also that we can sense, that we can practice it, we can feel it, we can communicate with it.
Mm-hmm, sure.
That it's a little bit similar to our culture, maybe. So the same way with openings. When I want to learn a new opening, I'm trying to think first and foremost whether or not I can play this position or this structure without learning any theory.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't have the ability to do so, at least for a few games against people either at my level or a bit worse, who know some theory, and I can somehow find my way through the dynamic complications of the position just by trying to guess the moves and my own logic, then probably it's not for me. That's how I usually look at new openings. And of course there is also the part inside that makes me feel excited when I see a position and imagine myself playing it over the board. So if you don't get this sense of natural grasp of the position, at least at a certain level, a little bit below your rating, nor the ability to to be excited about the idea of learning it. Just someone might be excited when they think about learning a new language and communicating with new people from different cultures, or the same people on a different, deeper level than they have before. Then you shouldn't begin with it in the first place. So
the first thing to look for is, do you have a feel for the position? You know, this reminds me, I spoke with, I'm not going to mention any names, but I spoke with a very well-known theoretician, and he said that even in the books that he's written on certain lines, he does offer some secondary moves. He does offer some sidelines. And he says, this move has also proven playable for white, or this move has also proven to be a good defense, good drawing chances for black, etc. And he said that the reason he provided those moves is because sometimes the main line as he sees it is just not the main line as other people see it. Meaning it doesn't feel right. And you shouldn't feel this obligation to go with the trend and just get yanked downstream in some massive opening system like a Najdorf or even a Rossolimo, which is a large opening system, if you have some other system that might feel better for you. So I think that's a very useful piece of information. Looks like we've got some more moves on the board. Essentially as you predicted. White
not the same move, but the same idea, to protect c5 and prepare. So that's another move that I used to play. I don't remember if queen e7 or b6 was more popular back when I played it. I just remember that queen e7 made more sense to me, because usually they play queen e7 after b6 anyways. So it felt like a little bit of...
Is this black's only solution for the bishop that's otherwise just standing there inactive? Is that
it's not for the bishop, it's for the knight. It's for the sake of protecting the c5 pawn.
I see. And so the bishop... So despite the fact that white has opened up a diagonal a short diagonal for his light squared bishop, that bishop's not moving anytime soon. We're happy with the fact that the bishop is on its original square. Again, something that's going to be surprising for a lot of beginners, because beginners are told, get your pieces out. And now you're saying, no, keep your light square bishop on its original square, and it's going to be fine there for quite some time. Does that go back to the position being closed and us having more time? Is that what it's about?
Yeah. The reason is, as we mentioned before, this position is closed, and there is no potential for any pawn breaks anytime soon. f5 doesn't make much sense for black. It's underdeveloped and it will weaken his king. And f4 will take some time for white to arrange. Actually, that's white's main plan. So black would like to be able to address the move f4 or f4 related plans with, let's say, planting his knight on d4 as quickly as possible. And right now, black is a little bit passive. So let's just imagine that black does nothing because the position is closed. Okay, just for the sake of example. So let's try to make some random moves, something like that. And now white gets f4.
Okay.
So this position is already very dangerous for black. Because
this is a true pawn break.
Yeah.
Where the attack with the pawn now creates real tension in the center that has to be addressed immediately.
Yeah, and black is obviously not lost yet, but just to be clear about what's going to happen next is that, let's say that he castles or even takes. So for the sake of analysis, I just want to show how the game might develop if the knight here doesn't find a good solution. White will get knight g4 in, and now white has 4 pieces that are kind of eyeing the black king in one way or another. And black has a lot of difficulty to bring any pieces to the defense. Knight f6 will almost lose to bishop g5 because of the pin. In some cases, knight h6 is also very dangerous, followed by bishop g5. And there is no real good square for the knight. If you go rook e8, then I will play knight h6 check and force you to get rid of your bishop. So in this position, if black didn't maneuver his knight to d4 in time and his bishop, let's say, to e6, which is its natural square, then he can find himself in severe problems. And the reason for it lies in the opening. So let's go back to move 1 and see what happened. So looking at the most basic principles of chess, you want to develop a piece and conquer the center on every given move. So far, white played e4 to open up the bishop. Black didn't develop any piece in the direction of his castling. So in a let's say, very shallow sense of the word, black wasted a move. Okay? Of course, it's very dynamic, but he wasted a move. Okay, now...
Now, again, just to be clear, we are absolutely not suggesting that that one c5 for black is a bad move, but in the most classical sense, and the Sicilian is recognized to be not exactly a classical opening. It isn't e4, e5, because it doesn't create that balanced response to what white did.
So e4, e5 is very classical because black gets to develop very quickly and try to challenge white in the center in the most direct way. But here, okay, so black, in a sense, in the most simplistic sense of the word, wasting time, but he gains other things. He gains some grasp on the d4 square, and the knight here, together with some pawns that will move in the center, will grant black some strong grip on other squares in the center that white doesn't control, and it will create some dynamic collision between the principles. But just to stick to the most basic development principle, white developed 3 different pieces, okay, 2 pieces and 1 pawn, in the first 3 moves. Now what black did? g6. So in the first 3 moves, black
moved 2 pawns
black moved no pieces in the direction of castling. So essentially he's 2 moves behind. Okay? Now this move doesn't waste time for either player. Maybe black gains some means to develop his bishop. Now white continues his development, okay? Because this helps develop the bishop. Black goes bishop g7. h3 prevents bishop g4. That's another, let's call it a small waste of a move. Knight f6. So in this position, just from the let's say from counting point of view, it's more or less equal. In the same simplistic sense I was talking about. Both players develop the same amount of pieces. But now, white develops a piece, black doesn't.
Right.
White develops another piece, black doesn't. White developed another piece, black doesn't. So black essentially lost 3 different moves.
3 different moves, developmentally.
Yes, for development point of view. And he simply cannot afford to waste another move, because knight h2 and f4 will create a huge initiative for white.
So he has maxed out the passivity that you were talking about that you can get away with in a closed position. You're saying, listen, it's true. In a closed position, you can get away with moving a piece a few extra times or engaging in a little bit of passivity and not directly marshaling your forces the way you're told when you're a kid. But that has its limits, and if you keep on with that approach, you're going to be choking. You're going to be in the deep waters of white's pieces that are now going to come at the king full force. Because white's plan is very clear, like you said. The bishop is attacking the king's side, the knight is coming at the king's side, the rook is coming at the king's side, the queen is coming at the king's side. This is a very clear plan.
Yes. Actually, I have to correct myself a little bit, because even after knight h2, black is most likely to waste more time with pieces. But the reason for it is not the classical reason of development. It's something that, let's call it something more of the computer era. People check these kind of lines with computers, and so that computers confirm that it's fine. And now let's say after f4 takes, black has kind of a tempo on the bishop.
Okay.
And I would like to play bishop h6 if I could with the queen on d2, but I can't, so I will probably go bishop g3. And then the next thing to happen will be knight d4, which seems like another waste of a move, and bishop e6. And now what we see in front of us is a very weird position. White has a lead in development, but if he goes knight g4 with the same idea to attack, black can try to play queen e7, and potentially after, let's say, an attacking move like e5, so castling short is very dangerous for black, but suddenly black castles long.
And the center is entirely controlled by these major pieces.
He has 2 open files, the rook can join later, and the bishops are very powerful in the open position. So the reason for black to be wasting so much time is actually very difficult to explain directly, but it's an advanced principle in chess that when you can afford to do so, which is a very limited definition, but when you can afford to do so, concretely speaking, it's better to postpone castling, be careful when doing so you can be flexible with your king to castle in both directions if needed. Like you choose the better one.
You and I spoke one time about the value of not making any committal move, any major commitment at the board until the last possible moment that you must.
Yes.
But you can't delay it forever. Like you said, if you delay it forever, you're going to pay the price.
Yes.
But there are very few moves that are more committal than castling. You're going to castle one way or the other, and that's the end of the story.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is, of all the moves that you need to make, the one that you would love to be able to hold off on until the very last moment is whether you castle long or short. And the Sicilian as a principle, I think this is well known, that a Sicilian as a principle is an opening system for black that allows you to delay castling a lot more than any of the E5 responses, as far as I understand it. It's a general rule.
Yeah. So many people mistakenly think that knowing where to put the pieces is the key to become a good chess player. And it is, in a way. But that's very easy compared to the dynamic part of the game, which is, okay, I know where to put the pieces. Now, in which order do I do that? Now, that's real dynamic chess when you think about it. Because every, let's say, club player who've seen this structure before will know that black should play knight f8, knight e6, knight d4, bishop e6, queen e7, and castle somewhere. But no one can really be sure in which order to do so. Even I, myself, who played this position in the past, couldn't recall whether b6 or queen e7 is more precise. So you see, I know these two moves. I'm sure Carlsen does as well. But without the proper education, or let's say hard work at home, which I'm sure Carlsen has made, and many players even above 2000 do nowadays.
Sure.
I'm sure that it's not a matter of just guessing. Like, to realize which move is more precise takes a huge amount of preparation or skill. Yeah.
So it's interesting when we were saying earlier that when you select an opening, one of the things that you'd like to do is make sure that you get a feel, you have a sense of the position from a natural perspective. I get a sense of why these pieces should go where they are, and that's why I play the X opening. Nevertheless, at some point, you're going to have to put in the hours. You're going to have to do the hard work. You're saying, I don't care if you're Magnus Carlsen, Fabiano Caruana, Tal Baron, Joseph Levin, whoever you are, at some point, no opening, you're not going to reach deep enough into any opening on intuition alone. And there are going to be move orders, and there are going to be lines, and there are going to be surprising responses to particular moves that you simply have to study.
Yeah.
And that, I think, leads us to one of the most interesting questions for lower level chess players. How much of my time, let's assume I have 3 hours a week to play chess, which not everybody has 3 hours a week to invest in their chess game, but let's 3 hours a week to invest in my chess. How much of that time can I put into deciding the correct move order in the Rossolimo versus solving tactics, learning endgame? Is there a priority? I mean,
I wish I had someone to address this question too. Because like nobody really knows the answer. And
yeah, I mean, I think
you have to guess.
The question's been asked 1,000 times.
No, but it's like, even if I'll pretend that I know the answer for your level,
sure,
which I don't fully know, I can guess, then I still have the same question if
at your level.
Yeah, when I speak to stronger players. And you can only try, it's a trial and error kind of journey when it comes to chess improvement. And of course, the general thing you want to do is to invest in the most rewarding part of the game. But then these small, tiny little nuances, they are kind of important, but you can't really say how much time it's worth when your time is limited and you don't plan on becoming the world champion later on. Like, so, yeah, it's been there forever. We are lagging a little bit.
Yeah.
But
we're definitely going to try to
yeah,
fix that for next time.
But it might only be my computer here, so who knows? People are still watching, still active in the chat. So
yeah, we're going to get to the chat in a minute and take a look at some of these questions and see if we can't help other people besides me. I feel like that's a question. It's a question I've posed to several grandmasters, and I've never once. Not only have I never gotten the same answer, I've never really gotten a straight answer. And I'm not saying that to criticize anyone. I'm saying that as a point of fact. the one response that has been consistent, and again, I don't want to throw out a bunch of names, but of the 6 grandmasters that I've spoken to about this same exact question, the one thing that's been consistent is you absolutely have to enjoy the time that you invest in it. Yeah. Not just because chess is a game, but because it is simply easier to learn and to advance and to grow when you are enjoying it, when you are engaged, when you are concentrated. So if you, I know one player, a good friend of yours, who actually said to me, I don't have any fixed schedule. I don't have an exact way of studying the game of chess. This is a professional grandmaster. You would think he would have a strict system. He said, I get up in the morning, and if I am dying to look over the move order in the Rossolimo, that's what I'm going to do. And if I'm dying to solve tactics, I might solve tactics for 6 straight hours. And in his opinion, that can extend all the way down to the 1400 level. You feel like solving tactics? There's a part of you inside that's burning to solve tactics. Solve tactics for 3 or 4 hours. It's never a bad thing to do. Yeah. You want to study openings? But with one caveat. Make sure that over the course of, let's say, a 2-week period of time, you have covered all of the different things. In other words, don't have to cover everything every day. But within 2 weeks' time, you should have looked over your repertoire, solved a lot of tactics, worked on your endgame precision, and gotten a basic sense of how grandmasters play the opening that you've chosen to play. Would you say that that's as close to a system as you can really expect people to have?
Well, it's a tough question.
Hard to say. So why don't we take a look at the chat meanwhile, and I'll let you muse over this this interesting question of mine, because like I said, you know, you're the expert, but I'm just, it's a question that's been bugging me forever.
You're posing very good question. I think my main challenge is to try to answer them throughout the entire stream.
Yeah, I don't think that's a question that we can necessarily answer right now. We can
discuss them.
I think it's one thing that needs to be discussed in great detail.
And we can also involve the people in the chat in it once we'll be able to see if the stream works properly. So let's see here.
You know what? Maybe we check on my computer, or I don't want to.
Sure.
Or is it going to hurt the Wi-Fi if I?
No, I don't think so. It's just the upload.
It's the upload time?
Yeah, that's the only thing that matters.
So let's see if I go onto YouTube and let's see how it looks from.
But we have another move that I will address. Knight h2, as I mentioned. The plan being f4, and I want to take a try at your question, despite the bad internet and the move that was played. Try to address it properly. So can you repeat it for a moment?
Basically what I'm saying is, we know that we have to study the various aspects of the game of chess. We know there are openings, we know there's middle game, there's theory that has to be worked on, there's tactics that have to be mastered, or you're just hopeless. There's endgame, which is probably the most ignored part of chess. And if you take all 5 or 6 or 7 categories and you have 3 hours a week and you try to subdivide everything, you're going to end up doing 17 minutes of tactics and 13 minutes of openings and 21 minutes of... It doesn't make any sense. There's no way to have any kind of effective learning that way, and it's certainly not enjoyable, which we're saying is a precondition for good learning, the enjoyability of it. If that's the case, I don't think enjoyability is a real word, by the way. I think I made that up. But the enjoyability of it is limited. And so what you're saying is you got to have the fun. Go with the flow. How do we balance the go with the flow? I felt like doing tactics today. I felt like solving some positions in the Rossolimo today. How do we solve that and make sure that we don't neglect the various aspects of the game? That is the Grandmaster question of the day.
No, we'll have a few more, I have a feeling, if the game continues.
All right, well, let's check
I'll try to address it. First, you can look at the chat in the meantime. So my idea for trying to find the balance between everything is to... You can look at the chat in the meantime. Yeah. I let the game itself be my main source of improvement. So For example, if you are a football player and you want to improve as a kid, yeah, you're just playing football. That's the first thing you have to do. You don't talk about football, you don't think about it, you don't work on your muscles, you just go out with friends and play. And when it comes to chess, it's more or less the same. I just want to play chess. But because playing in tournament conditions, under tournament conditions in classical chess is very difficult, especially above a certain level, then I would recommend the practical solution, which is to play either Blitz or Rapid online.
Okay.
And when
that's a controversial statement. I'll
I'll
listen to your answer and then I'll come at you with that.
Feel free, be my guest, because Blitz has been a main source of improvement for me and many of my, let's say, professional chess playing friends. And I feel like it's not the main part, but imagine the Rossolimo, for example. So this opening we're discussing. Instead of just sitting in front of this position and asking myself, what do I want to study? And it's like an ocean of knowledge that I can start investigating here.
Sure.
I will just go online, play a game of Blitz against someone. Usually it will also be a grandmaster if my rating is high enough on one of the main sites. My favorite site currently is ICC, by the way.
Okay.
And then if I play, then I get to play against some player who picks some moves for me. So instead of me having to pick a line, he plays some moves. And then I always reach a point in the variation when I'm not sure what's the best move. So for example, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but up until here I guessed all of White's moves.
Sure.
Even though I played it with Black, I knew how to play it properly with White. So in the Blitz game, imagining that I were to play a Blitz game in this position, and we have Knight F8 on the board, at move maybe 10, maybe 13, maybe 20, I will reach a position in which I don't know what's the plan or what's the most precise move. And of course I'll try to handle it. And after the game, I'll have much more motivation to check that specific line.
I see.
So what I normally do is that I have my own analysis and I try to refresh them right after I play the game and learn from that game and then get a rematch with the same opponent and practice the same conclusions against him and then have some evolution of the line between me and my opponent and gain experience as I'm playing against them. And by doing so, by playing that position, instead of learning it or memorizing it, it sticks to my memory much more because it's connected to some sort of emotion. And I think,
interesting. Yeah. Okay. So rather than open up a book, set up your pieces, and start to memorize lines, again, in a brute force way, you're saying jump right in, jump into the water, and start trying to swim. And if you get it 5 moves deep, and you break down on the 6th move, now you feel the motivation to get to that 6th move. Or if you get it 12 moves deep, and then suddenly you no longer get a sense for how to continue with the position, you're going to automatically remember, you're going to remember the line, you're going to remember the position, you're going to remember the sense of frustration with that particular structure, and then you're going to... So this, now, why did I say that was so controversial? Because obviously, I think if there's one statement every who plays chess is told, it's stop playing Blitz online, stop playing Blitz online, stop playing Blitz online. You're wasting your time, you're developing bad habits, etc., etc., etc. And what you're saying is, wait a minute.
Stop listening to adults.
What you're saying is, wait a minute. Just because Blitz is not the most effective way to learn how to calculate or how to think precisely in terms of the long-term classical game, that doesn't mean that it doesn't serve certain functions. When it comes to forcing you into that state of mind where you feel of the frustration of, I gotta know what the next move is, and I don't have the time to get up and go look at it or to think about it for 15 minutes and invest that time in the clock, it's gonna arouse your passion, it's gonna get you energetic, it's gonna get you remembering, I gotta know what that next move in the Rossolimo is. And it wasn't Queen D2. I was so sure it was Queen D2, and it turns out Queen D2 is delayed for another 4 or 5 moves, and then you're never going to forget it. If nothing else, even if you don't remember the precise move order. One thing you remember is, when I first saw this, my instinct was to play Queen D2, and it turns out Queen D2 is a move. But it's a move down the line. It's part of the plan, not the immediate next move. So
I have an idea that I also want to mention.
Sure.
Is that imagine that I reach this position after knight h2 30 times in my next thousands of Blitz games, okay?
Right.
And I'm focusing on move number 18 or 20 in my analysis, okay?
Sure.
And I'm trying to force myself, or let's say to make efforts to find the right moves and understand them on move 18. What I don't take into account is that I learned the first 12 moves as a given just by aiming so high. So because I practiced the first 12 moves like 30 different times over and over again with my hands moving the pieces.
Sure.
Rather than my eyes looking at the chessboard, pressing the right arrow on chess base or whatever.
Sure.
Then this is something I call active learning. And I pretend that I'm trying to learn up until move 18, but in practice, all I need in order to be superior to my opponent is one move more than they do. That's another kind of theory, small theory that I invented, or probably existed before, but I made up for myself, is that if I know one move of theory or one move that makes sense of development more than my opponent, and I play it relatively quickly with confidence, then I have the psychological initiative in the game.
And possibly a time advantage.
Yeah, time advantage. I know more than he does for effect, because one move more means I have one less chance to make a mistake.
Yeah. I heard something very, very similar from, one of the guys, so to speak, where he said that if the only difference between you and your opponent coming out of the opening is that he had to work hard to make precise moves, and you didn't, then you're very likely at a psychological advantage, a physical advantage, and a time advantage.
Yes.
And those three things put together can be the difference between win, loss, and draw 100 times out of...
In any sport.
In any sport. Yeah, exactly. I mean, those are three huge advantages to have.
Yeah. And...
I do...
Yeah.
Lawrence Lepis says, major lag reporting for duty, sir. I think that deserves a shout out because that's actually really, really funny.
Yeah.
We are very sorry about the lag. We are certainly aware of it. We are going to do everything in our power over the course of the next few games to try to deal with those learning steps that we are taking here as commentators. We'll make sure that the screen looks a little better and that I'm actually even in the screen for that matter. you had to pick a big guy, So you're lucky you're small. Or
Yeah.
we would have there been no room for the two of
So,
us.
you know what? I'll try to stop the stream for a moment and then restart it with different settings to see if it will help out.
Let's see if we can do that. We're going to take a real short break so that we can try to fix this lag problem, and forgive us for 3 minutes of dead air time, and then we'll come back with something hopefully a bit